So so you're 32, you're vegan for 7 or 8 months, I think, and then what gets you off of that, and what's the next thing you experiment with? And what did you
So
what was the takeaway of 7 to 8 months? Why get off the vegan diet?
I mean, I think that I began to realize, like, wow, I am gaunt. I am really, really too skinny. I have horrible gas. I can't be around humans. I've joked about this, but it's completely true. When I was a physician assistant, I could not be in the same room with other people. I shared an office with a nurse practitioner and another physician assistant, and I didn't know this until after I left that job. But they complained to the CEO and said, "Paul has the worst gas. We can't work in the same office with him." And what is it? He told me, he's a good friend of mine now. He said, "What am I going to say? Stop farting? Paul, I need you to stop your diet." Like, what am I going to say to you? I can't tell a guy to stop farting. But there were so many things that kind of coalesced, and I realized, hey, I can't do this. I shouldn't do this anymore. I should begin to eat meat. But ideologically, it made sense. I heard Jeff Bland talking about our book of life, the fact that humans have always eaten meat, that it's written into our genetics. And I thought, oh, of course, that makes so much sense. And when I added meat back, my running got better. I immediately gained 10 pounds of muscle mass, and things felt much better in general. But I became sort of paleo. So I went from vegan to paleo. My eczema didn't get better, but my gas got a little bit better because I wasn't just eating kale shakes all day. And then I stayed paleo for probably the next 8 to 10 years. So all of medical school was paleo. I experimented with a lot of variations and had eczema throughout medical school. I had some really bad eczema flares in medical school. We talked about the debacle with the jiu-jitsu injury in medical school. And, when I graduated medical school, I was thinking about diet, but I still was eating a paleo type diet with grass-fed meat. I was not eating organs. Grass-fed meat, vegetables, salads, avocado, that kind of stuff. And I felt pretty good, but I still had eczema, and I still farted a moderate amount. And the eczema was the main driver. So then into residency.
Did you ever want to
And
quit a medical school during those 8 years? Since you went in like basically you're like, wait a second, I'm not going to medical school. Then you take a 6 year break and you decide, okay, I am going to go to medical school, and now you're in the thick of it. Did you ever want to be like, okay, I'm not doing this, or I
I
can't do
never wanted
this?
to. I never wanted to quit medical school. There were times I thought about quitting residency.
Okay.
So I think medical school was addictive for me because you're like, they give you these little mini goals, right? You take step one, then you take step two, and then you're like, oh man, I've already taken step one and step two, right? And for anyone that's not taken step one and step two, it's hard to describe what these are, but these are massively long board exams that determine the future. It's a big stress. So once you take step one, you're like, man, I should just finish medical school, right?
Okay.
But I knew that I was going to finish medical school. But, honestly, my choice of specialty does indicate that toward the end of medical school, I was becoming somewhat disillusioned because I chose to do a residency in psychiatry, but I did the best of all my rotations in internal medicine. And I didn't want to do internal medicine for my residency, although in retrospect, part of me wishes I had, because only in a selfish reason, because I've chosen to step outside of the box and think about dietary ideology in a different way. People use my psychiatry credential to criticize me, to try and denigrate me by saying that guy's a psychiatrist. What does he know about nutrition? Which is just a stupid appeal to authority. Everybody goes to the same medical school, and there's the same amount of nutrition taught in the psychiatry residency as there is in any other residency, which is zero. And to suggest that,
That's a great number.
to suggest that mood and of the brain and neurochemistry are not related to diet is absurd, right? I mean, psychiatric illness is neuroinflammation until proven otherwise. So there is as much tie through psychiatry to diet and nutrition and autoimmunity as there is in any other specialty. And we're all trained in the same medical school, and I took the same board exams as anybody else. And I would venture to say that I probably got much higher scores than many of the physicians that are criticizing me for being a quote psychiatrist, but it happens all the time. It just gave them something to criticize me on. And then I went on and got a board certification in nutrition as a physician, which is fine, just to kind of say to people like, fuck you, like I'm board certified in nutrition, shut the fuck up. But, you know, I in retrospect, I don't know that I would have been happier in internal medicine, but I did really well in my internal medicine rotations. And the internal medicine residents were like, why are you going into psychiatry? And so my answer was, psychiatry's human. I think that even at the end of medical school, I realized that so many of the disciplines didn't feel human. They weren't about human story, which I think is the foundation of how we become well as humans. Like, it's very hard to discuss with someone why they make the dietary changes they do, dietary choices they do, until you understand their story and where they've come from. So many people are making poor dietary choices because that's the only thing that they have that gives them pleasure, or that actually helps them feel alive. And so many of the behaviors that we do as humans that are destructive are coming from narratives. And that was fascinating to me. And that's all psychiatry, you know. And so that I thought, this is fascinating. This is the foundation of medicine, is our human story. And if we want to know how to help someone change who they are as a human, we have to understand their human story first. So I think most good medicine, every quote real doctor, in my opinion, should start with a patient's story and should understand who that patient is as a human being. And Osler has talked about that. It's more important to know what type of disease a patient has. And yet, so every physician, first and foremost, should be, quote, a psychiatrist. And if a physician is not understanding a human story, they're failing their patient, because they're not understanding what makes that patient tick and why they're making the decisions they are. So, you know, that was what drew me to psychiatry. But in retrospect, it just allowed people to try to discredit me in a very frustrating way. And in retrospect, if I could do it over, I would do internal medicine and just give everybody the finger and say, look, I did a residency in internal medicine. I actually thought about going back and do another residency in internal medicine, but I don't think I'm gonna put myself through 3 years of that hell, because it wouldn't benefit me in any way.
Anyone can quit coffee, anyone can quit kale, anyone can quit wheat bread, but the real hard part is realizing that the stories you have around them just aren't true. That coffee isn't good for you, that maybe kale isn't good for you, that maybe wheat bread isn't good for you. And I'm with you wholeheartedly. It's like what you said in one of your posts recently, like, hey, I'm going to tell you coffee's not ideal for you, and I know some of you are going to think I'm kicking your dog. Well, what you're really kicking is their narrative. And people have conflated their narrative with their identity, and yeah, it's a tough one. But the cool thing is once you know that, you can kind of fake it till you make it. You can be like, okay, he's right, and I know it's going to be hard to let go of this, but I can change my story, which will make quitting coffee even easier.
Or quitting, like you said, wheat bread, or quitting dairy, or quitting salads.
Your mom told you for 20 years it's good for you. It's a hard story to let go of. I get it.
Yeah, and you know, I'm just going to say this, and this is going to be a very controversial comment. And you could say the same thing about a carnivore diet or an animal-based diet in the same way, but I think that within our culture, dietary choices have become condoned eating disorders. And, you know, a lot of people, a lot of women or men choose vegan and vegetarian diets because it's a socially acceptable way to have an eating disorder. It's a socially acceptable way to be anorexic, right? And you could say the same thing about a carnivore diet.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I want people to guard against that. Do not use a dietary strategy as a socially acceptable way to have an eating disorder. If you're going to have an eating disorder, I think a carnivore or animal-based diet is going to give you way more nutrients than a vegan diet or vegetarian diet. And the reason people lose weight on these vegan and vegetarian diets is because they're calorically deficient. Because you cannot, and the reason I lost weight on a vegan diet is because you cannot physically pack in enough calories and enough nutrients to sustain your weight. And so let's just be completely frank and say that women, if you're listening to this and you're using a diet like that, that's bullshit. And you should stop doing that. And you should face the narrative, and you should face the self-image issues that you have that are telling you to do that. But it's super frustrating for me. And I think this is the reason that so many women choose these diets is because they allow them to be skinny and they can still fill their stomach. And they want to be skinny, and they have so many self-image issues that are driving this.
I
And
don't
it's all
think it's
about the narrative.
I don't think it's just women. I think it's men too. I think maybe God, I have no idea what I'm saying right now, but maybe 20 years ago it was women, but it seems to really be like men are really with all the social media, all the images that we're being bombarded with. It's wow, I think you nailed it. That is a tough one to swallow, and a lot of people are gonna like see that as a black and white statement. I don't see it as a black and white statement, but you're right. I I agree.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, I
And
see
hey,
it,
if you're
right?
and hey, and here's the thing: even if you're wrong, no one should get offended. Who cares? Like then it's not then it doesn't fit you. So what? If you're not
Yeah,
vegan
yeah,
because you don't if you're vegan and you don't have an eating disorder, fine. Then it's not, then Paul's not talking to you.
yeah. I'm not talking to you, and
Yeah,
I don't think there's
then
many.
don't
I
get
don't think there's many
offended.
vegans. I don't think there's many vegans that listen to my podcast. So I wish there were more because they need to. They're the people that need to hear this. And but I think that people make food choices because it sometimes it plays into their societal narrative and their personal narrative about self worth. So yeah, it's tricky.